Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Howard. I'm a faculty in the Department of Family Medicine at McMaster, and I am involved in the committee that's putting together the Scholars Chat. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Elizabeth, also as a part of this committee?
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Alvarez, and I'm a family physician, but I'm full-time assistant professor in the Department of Health Research Methods, Evidence, and Impact at McMaster University, mainly focusing on public health.
Thanks. And Teresa, does everyone know you?
Yeah, I'm Teresa Chan. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Program for Academic Development and Tech Support for today's session.
Thank you. So I know with our speakers, we thank you very much for coming and sharing your thoughts and expertise today. And I know you have some introduction through actually your slides and your own brand, but I've got a bit of bios to share with the group. So Jonathan Sherbino is Assistant Dean of McMaster Education Research Innovation and Theory, or MERIT program, and professor in the Department of Medicine, and past chair of Royal College Emergency Medicine Specialty Committee and co-editor of CanMeds 2015. And co-founder of the Royal College Area of Focus Competence Clinical Educator, and also the co-host of the Key Literature and Medical Education, or Keyline podcast, which has an audience of 80 countries around the world. And his program of research is in diagnostic reasoning. And our other keynote speaker is Shawn Mondoux, who's an emergency physician and lead for quality and safety in the emergency department at St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. And he co-leads the innovation portfolio at the corporate level there. He's assistant professor within the Division of Emergency Medicine and Department of Medicine at McMaster and at the Institute for Health Policy Management and Evaluation at University of Toronto. And Shawn currently leads many local, provincial, and national initiatives in capacity for an improvement scientist and advisor. And he says he's obsessed with healthcare delivery problems while remaining a health system optimist. And through his capacity as an improvement scientist and innovation advisor, Shawn is co-leading provincial evaluation for virtual ED care and in the process of creating a health startup dedicated to providing emergency physicians with their own practice data, including patient-reported outcome measures, and is using AI to predict ED department volumes and flows, and is continually looking to build more improvers to help change the face of healthcare. We'll turn it over to both of you. Take us through your thoughts for the next few minutes.
Thank you to you, Michelle, and to Elizabeth for those introductions. If you've never been part of this Scholars Chat, then let me just set up really what we're going to try to do. Shawn and I are intentionally going to try to push some buttons, be provocateurs, and not take up too much of the hour of your lunch break, so that you can then wrestle around, maybe have a conversation, challenge yourself in the role in the small groups. And so we want to just set up the argument fairly briefly. It may feel like a bit of a straw dog to you in the sense that we want to push enough buttons that you start thinking about issues, and then pick out what are the pearls and the things that you want to take away. And then we'll come back at the end of a small group discussion where you can have an opportunity to kind of share, here's what I learned when I engaged with some of my peers around this conversation. We have 3 points, and I'll let Shawn jump in and debate anything I say here because he's passionate but an optimist about healthcare. The first I would say is we talk a lot about academic branding. It seems like it's the new hot spot or the new hot topic, and I think that's also been a previous point of conversation here on the Scholar Chat series. But really, you need to have a personal understanding about how you want to internally organize and externally present yourself. And if you haven't done that in an intentional way, slowly you are being defined by others. They're defining you by just the clinical titles that you have or the roles that you're taking on. And the reason to have that internal consistency, to be able to say, okay, as a professional or in my academic life, this is how I set up the boundaries, is that it allows you to do a couple things. It gives you a framework by which you can say yes and no. Yes, to say, okay, this opportunity that's being presented to me aligns really well with how I'm helping to design and put myself together. It also allows you to say, okay, what are the things that I should be looking for? And equally, when things are presented to you, what are the things I should say no, because they are not consistent with how I'm trying to organize myself. So as an example, I think of myself as a clinician educator, someone who practices full-time clinical medicine, but is really engaged in education. And so healthcare being and the health system being what it is, there is endless opportunities. No one's ever going to say, sorry, we've run out of jobs, volunteer committees and whatnot. And that's never going to happen. So for me, when someone comes along and says, we have this really interesting committee, it's looking at quality improvement and quality assurance in the hospital, I tell myself, is that who I've internally organized myself to be? No, I'm not a quality improvement specialist. Some of my best friends are. But that doesn't align with how I imagine myself to be. And so I do not immediately say, sure, I'll jump on that committee simply because I've been asked or because I feel some obligation. The second reason to have that internal framework is it allows you, particularly early on in your career, or maybe even in the middle part of your career as you're imagining transitions, to engage people to enter into opportunities or to be part of projects or to collaborate in certain ways by articulating that your skill set would be complementary to it. So for me, and the educator side of my clinician educator mentality, there was some early opportunities to work in professional development. And so I was able to articulate to people saying, listen, I'd really like to be a part of this project and help work on this conference because it seems to align with some of the interests that I have as an educator. And I was able to very succinctly express to them, this is who I am, and this is how I'll be a complement to this initiative and how I can be a collaborator. So our first pitch to you is, if you can't internally represent who you are, what your academic brand is, you are going to be really spread thin. The diversity of the projects and initiatives you are will be a challenge to managing your resources and your time. And secondly, if you cannot articulate who you are, the things that you want to be involved with, it'll be much harder for you to break into those opportunities and to expand your professional network. All right, Shawn, what did I say that was smart? What are the parts that I broke that you need to pick up the pieces for?
No. I mean, I wouldn't add much. I think those are the most important points to cover. And I think the bigger question is, how do you get to this idea of what do I bring to the table? What do I want to be doing? What does my future look like? Where do I want to be? And so all of those questions kind of get around shaping the same thing. And some of those questions resonate for some people. You know, the question like, what do I want to be doing in 5 years in complement to my medical career? Or some people like to say, like, who am I? Like, why am I special? What do I bring to the table? And all of those are kind of getting at this same notion, this same question of like, what is my brand and how do I augment that? And the brand isn't necessarily that you do those things. It's that you're recognized as a person who does those things. And so there's both the step of looking for those opportunities and two, getting out there and talking about those opportunities and advertising yourself as a person who wants to be part of those activities and becoming known in a more broader scale as the person to go to if you have X problem or Y problem or need X question answered. We'll talk a little bit later about how you evolve some of those questions, which I think is also the subject of a subsequent chat series. But as a relatively junior clinician, I'm undergoing a little bit of that transition now, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with the group later. But I think the most important points you covered, John, not unsurprisingly.
All right, so Shawn, talk to us what happens if you've been externally branded as we've hired this type of individual, this scientist or this academic leader or this type of clinician, and that's not how you internally represent yourself. So how do you navigate that space?
Yeah, I think as people who are starting, or even folks who are established, we need to be mindful first of what our brand currently is. And for those of us, at least who started, myself included, you get hired on a specific hook. Like, you are a person who gets hired because you can do X or you can do Y, or you're known to do whatever your shtick is. And typically those areas are quite broad. If I do quality improvement, in the eyes of the people who hired me, that means that if you have a problem, you go talk to Shawn. And to some degree, that's not wrong, but quality improvement is a large area. And for me, I wanted to get in specific places and I want to change specific things. And in fact, I'm getting into this idea now that I want to move towards an innovation slant as well, in addition to quality improvement, which has a little bit of a different brand. So the point for me is to leave this idea of only doing quality improvement, that this very structured methodology is what I do, to going more towards something that, well, if you want to deploy change in a clinical setting, no matter what the modality, then go talk to Shawn. And so the process is, one, first lean into the opportunities that are brought to you because of that initial hook. And my track to having a little bit of broader success was to say yes very broadly. It's almost all things that were brought to me because those were strategic opportunities that led to downstream innovation. I could get in the door and say, you know what? This is an important initiative. It needs to change. Quality improvement is not the tool to do this, but I think we can do it. We can add some innovation elements, or we can bring in some people and act as a connector within that area. And then all of a sudden, my brand starts to change by the people who are building those committees, from somebody who only does quality improvement to somebody who fixes problems, and not only with quality improvement, but with all kinds of modalities. And that's the change that I'm undergoing now. And thankfully, to be able to be recognized from an institution relatively early to say, you know what, we have an innovation agenda that isn't being pushed. We're looking for a clinician to do that, but let's pick somebody who does quality improvement, is a little bit of a jump. But that's what the brand change means. It has to be a guided process. You have to explicitly move towards where you want to be. And it has to be seen by those who guide the career. So that, our ED chief, John, as one of the persons who helps me as a sponsor for some of my work, the leadership at St. Joe's, those all have to see that I'm moving towards innovation as a complementary area. So the takeaway points for you as individuals is know where you sit now relative to where you want to be. Know that the gap in what your identity is, and look for those opportunities that allow you to sit in a place to identify that gap and position yourself as a person who can fill it, or at least bring the people together to do that work.
So if I was going to amplify a key message that I heard from you, Shawn, and something I just learned, is the idea of who we are. Our reputation, if you want to use a different word for brand, is dynamic, and it will change. Now, we need to be the drivers of that change and be thoughtful and intentional of this. Otherwise, the external pressures can influence us and take us into places where we might not have optimally imagined our academic career to develop and grow. The last point we want to kind of push your bases with is, oh no, not another comment about social media, but who we are in our professional network certainly is built on the in-person interactions we have in the environment of our home institution, whether a hospital, a university, an academic department. But increasingly, we are known as individuals, and not necessarily simply as, I have an academic appointment, I'm an assistant or an associate professor at McMaster University in some capacity, but rather we have our own professional and academic identity beyond that. And so I'm stealing some ideas here, and I direct you to the original source. You can grab the link at the bottom here that will take you out to some other writings by Michelle Lin, who is kind of the author of this blog. And she builds off of some of the work in the business literature that says, when you want to know who somebody is and you don't have a professional connection, the natural instinct we all have is to immediately Google them. And so if you've never Googled your name, then you are passively allowing the internets to define and shape who you are. And so one of the kind of researcher 101 techniques that are currently most people who are entering early career faculty positions is to have a lab website, so that matches most effectively in with search engine optimization. That's where the Google of who is Dr. So-and-so, who are they? And so having that website kind of is your anchor, your home base. You can have embassies, social media platforms. So I use Twitter as a way to say, here's the things that I'm involved in, and here's the things that I'm doing. I don't use Twitter as much anymore because it's turning into a bit of a dumpster fire, I think, in terms of the conversations. But the dialogue has really kind of changed its tone in the last year to 18 months. But I still use it as a way of amplifying and promoting the things that I'm involved with. And then the last idea is the idea of outposts. What's happening relevant to who I am or to the things that I'm interested in? Can I have something that sends me back from the online conversations, and particularly from the literature for me as an education researcher, to say what's happening in the domains that I might not have found without using some kind of optimized search. So let me show you what that kind of looks like. This is the Mac expert page for Shawn. So if you have a faculty position, you have a pre-populated web page that has you down there. And if you don't have an alternative home base, this is where Google will often find you. And so I'd encourage you, if you are a McMaster faculty, to go and look at what it is and make the necessary edits. And so it has a bio. It also has a bit of a social network analysis here that says, here's, and you can move in and look at it in more granular detail. Here's the people locally that Shawn is working with, et cetera. Here is the landing page for my own website. And I have very limited time or expertise in web design, but for about $20 a year, this is my website. Nobody else wanted sherbino.com, shockingly. So it's all mine without having to buy it off from someone. And this is where, when you search my name, this will be one of the top hits in terms of where it lands. And I look at that every year and may add some things, but it's all passive. I don't attend to it in any kind of real way. Here is how I am using Google Scholar alerts to keep me up to date about what's happening. So there are some keywords I want to search about things that relate to my academic brand, about the things that I'm investing in research. There are some things I want to know when my name gets mentioned, often as a citation, is most typically when other people are building on my own scholarship. And so these are pre-populated. And I get an email anytime the Google finds something relevant to the keywords. And so you can set these up in a frequency and a specificity and a delivery method that works for you. Shawn, any last things you want to say about the need to monitor and to actively shape how the world beyond your actual physical community at your home institution, department, university, into kind of the global connectivity that we all have and experience now?
Yeah, I would say that I love these Google alerts. I use them as well. I use it both in Scholar and Google in general. So that if somebody mentions my name in the World Wide Web for whatever reason in an article or whatever, that I know about it. I think that's probably a good policy no matter who you are. If somebody's talking about you out in the world, you should probably know about it. If you have a super common name, that's probably not the thing to be Googling. You're going to get all kinds of things. But for me, it actually, yeah, exactly. Yay, Mondoux with an X. So the last thing I would say is, as I Google my own name, the pages that come up are sites that unsurprisingly spend a lot of money trying to optimize their relevance in Google, right? These are sites and places that spend a lot of money making sure that when you Google something that they land at the top. And so McMaster is one of them. LinkedIn is another. Twitter is another. The University of Toronto is another. And then my Google Scholar page. Well, 3 of those are things that are entirely free for me to set up and become the way that I convey who I am on the net. So LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google Scholar, if you haven't set those things up, they're really low resource ways to kind of get who you are out there into the world. And so I would consider that for everybody who's actually meaningfully wanting to dive into their own brand and identity out in the World Wide Web.
So you've heard enough from us. What was an aha or an epiphany for you? Do you have an internal representation of how you can articulate who you are? Are you actively managing the dynamic change in what your reputation professionally or your academic brand is? And how are you managing the conversations that are happening beyond your local professional network about you in this global connected community of health sciences?